In 1907, George Anderson boarded a buggy in La Porte, Indiana. He asked the driver to bring him to the Belle Gunness farm. Shortly after, the driver looked at George Anderson. I'd taken maybe 40 men out to that farm and never brought any back. He then added, "Your family, right?" George nodded. "Yeah," the driver said. "Everyone who goes out to that farm says they're a family." But George wasn't related to Belle Gunness. He had answered a matrimonial ad. In the ad, Belle Gunness had expressed that she was seeking a man for marriage, a man that had money. And George did. He was a former gold miner with savings in his pocket, or, to be more precise, sewn into his jacket. Gunness had asked him to do that. She had also asked him to bring all the letters she had sent him and not tell anyone where he was going. George obeyed to all the demands. It was, after all, a small price to pay for what appeared to be the dream woman, a delicate Norwegian gal that cooked Norwegian food and even owned a huge farm. But when he got to the farm, he quickly found out that Belle wasn't anything like she had described herself. She wasn't sweet and delicate. She was big and heavy. And she immediately started questioning him. Did you bring all the letters? And the money? Did you bring them all? George confirmed. And eventually, Belle started cooking. And for a moment, George relaxed. Maybe this wouldn't be that bad after all. At least she could cook. Later that night, George went to bed. But he couldn't sleep. Something felt off. What was this woman really after? And then, in the middle of the night, George Anderson saw a huge figure appear in the doorway. It was Belle. "What do you want from me?" George asked in horror. "Oh, nothing," Belle said. "You cried in your sleep. I just came to check on you." She smiled. "Good night." But George didn't get a good night's sleep after that. He had seen that she hid something beneath her robe. It looked a lot like a meat cleaver. Quietly, George unlatched the window, climbed out, and ran. The next morning, he showed up at the sheriff's office, told the sheriff everything that had happened. The sheriff just laughed. "No, no, no. You must have imagined it. Belle Gunness is a respected woman. She goes to church every Sunday. She wouldn't do anything like that." But Belle Gunness did exactly things like that. 1 year later, 11 bodies were dug up on her farm, and that was just the beginning. This episode of 200 Norwegians is about the most dangerous Norwegian church lady in American history, and possibly also the most lethal American female serial killer ever, Miss Belle Gunness. Before I start this episode, I just want to be frank about one thing. I might say a lot of things that aren't true in this episode. Not because I want to, but because in a story like this, it is really hard to know what's true and what's not. The one person who knew the full truth, she was deeply dishonest and never properly interrogated. And the other people who knew parts of the truth, well, they didn't live long. So trying to piece together a coherent story here takes a mix of guesswork and analysis. Police reports and newspaper stories from the time often contradict each other. And so do many of the books that have been written about Belle Gunness. In a case like this, working on a podcast without the luxury of going back to cross-check every single original source, I had to make a choice. I had to find out who to trust. I ended up placing a lot of trust in Jane Ammeson, who wrote a book about Belle Gunness in 2021. To me, it seems like Ammeson has done a diligent job of reading and cross-referencing original sources. Here she is, answering why she titled the book America's Femme Fatale, a title suggesting that Belle Gunness wasn't just bloodthirsty, but also sophisticated in her endeavor.
She knew how to seduce, not only sexually, but emotionally. She ran her business like a CEO of a corporation. And I think a lot of femme fatales, they know what they're doing. They're not just lustful or whatever. They know how to pick a target and get that target to do what they want. And she knew how to do that on a mass scale.
We will talk more about the mass scale later, but first, let's go back to her humble beginnings. Belle Gunness was born Brynhild Paulsdotter Størsethgjerde in Selbu, Norway. Her parents were cotters or tenant farmers. They had 4 children. Information about Brynhild's early life is mixed, and the records don't agree already here. One of her school teachers gave her glowing praise. The teacher said that she was bright and well behaved. The local pastor, Hansten, echoed this in the church records, but after the murders came to light in 1908, other stories surfaced. A Trondheim newspaper quoted her brother saying she had always been lazy and evil. Another story claimed that she was promiscuous, that she only pursued rich boys and shunned the poor. This is fitting for what happened later. Maybe a little bit too fitting. Personally, I get the sense that certain people cherry-picked stories to make sense of it all, like we all do sometimes when we try to rationalize things that are otherwise hard to rationalize. There is, however, one story that pops up in multiple sources, one that suggests that Brynhild fell for a boy from a higher class. But Brynhild got rejected.
The family was very wealthy. He was, did not want to marry a poor peasant girl. And so he, you know, he beat her, denied the pregnancy, and she miscarried. Supposedly, he died shortly after he beat her, and that she had poisoned him.
This is, however, an unverified story.
I don't have his name. I've never been able to find out the name of the family, and I would love to, because that way you might be able to prove through records whether some of the information is correct.
What is verified, though, is that she went to the US at the age of 22. In Chicago, she was welcomed by her sister and her husband, John. The city was booming back then, booming with people, new industry, and wealth. Some sources suggest that Brynhild, who now went by Bella, not Belle yet, reinvented herself. She quickly picked up English, became more religious, and got involved with the Norwegian Lutheran Society, and started presenting herself as a finer lady. And she got obsessed with money. She worked as a domestic, cleaned and dusted, but that didn't make her wealthy. And neither did her first husband, Mats Ditlev Anton Sørensen. He was also Norwegian. He was tall and handsome, a perfect match. But again, he wasn't wealthy. He worked at the department store and received a modest pay. Bella, however, learned there were many ways to chase the American dream. Insurance, for one, became a key income for her. She first got a payout after a house fire. She reinvested it in a confectionery shop, which not long after mysteriously burned down, which of course generated another payout. And Bella also quickly realized that money could be made in even more sinister ways.
the time there was an abundance of abandoned children who were going into orphanages, and she would adopt children. They would pay you to adopt, and then the children would die, or disappear mysteriously, and then she would adopt more children.
Bella also realized she could make even more money off the children if she took out insurance policies on them. I personally have never heard about people collecting insurance money after their kids passed away. What was that common back then?
I think it was more common than it is now. I think you could buy insurance for fairly cheap. And, if you were poor or lower middle class, you'd need money for a funeral and burial. There are stories that neighbors told about, oh, there'd be this cute little girl and they'd come over and visit and she'd be there. I think she's up to the age of 3, and then all of a sudden she disappeared. And, and I don't know how many children under her care died, but it was quite a few. A couple of them are buried in Chicago. So she had a racket going.
Ammeson's book suggests that Mats Sørensen was late to catch on. He never fully understood what was happening. In fact, he grieved for every child he had to bury. So he wasn't necessarily getting suspicious when Bella suggested that he himself should take out a life insurance policy. Bella reminded him that he was getting older, that he had a heart condition. What would happen if he passed away? What would Bella and the children do? So Mats Sørensen did. He signed a new insurance policy. And lo and behold, a little bit later, Mats Sørensen also dropped dead.
Her family was pretty sure he was murdered by her. He was switching jobs, and his insurance policy from the old job was still active for one day, and his new policy had started, and he died that day. And even a doctor who treated him thought he might have been poisoned. The family wanted to have his body exhumed and tested, but it was too expensive and they couldn't afford it.
So it was very convenient for her that he passed away on that day because the insurance overlapped, right?
And she already knew the insurance racket because she had been having fires in houses and a store she had and collecting insurance money. Plus, she had collected insurance money on the children that died under her care.
Bella collected $8,500 from her late husband's death. That's close to $250,000 today. She was now the wealthy woman she'd always wanted to be. But people were talking, especially the neighbors. At some point, she came to the conclusion that it was about time to move on. And she bought a farm just outside La Porte, Indiana. And here, in La Porte, she went by Belle. Belle didn't waste her time. She insured the carriage house and the boat pavilion, and quickly after, both buildings burned down to the ground. But she also expanded her business, and that expansion included some connections she had made in the Chicago underworld.
She had 45 acres there, which is a lot of land to bury people. So the idea is if you murder somebody in Chicago, you got a body. What are you going to do with it? And so the mobsters would bundle up the body in a trunk or in a box and ship it to Belle. And Belle would she had a whole kind of organization. I don't know, organization is assembly line. She was good at cutting up hogs and because she raised because she raised hogs. So she knew how to butcher, and she would butcher the bodies, and then she would disperse the limbs, the heads, the bodies in different places so that, it wasn't like burying a body all in one. But she'd also cover them with quicklime, which helped decompose the bodies more rapidly. And so, well, you asked for documentation. I don't have absolute documentation. I have from newspaper interviews, neighbors who would say she would get all these boxes, big, heavy boxes delivered to the house. And, and the take was that she was dismembering the bodies that came from mobsters and then dispersing the body parts throughout her property.
Ammeson also believes that Belle was running an abortion clinic on her farm.
The prostitution wasn't unusual back then. Well, it's not unusual. And Chicago was just a train ride away. So supposedly when mobsters' girlfriends got pregnant, they would go to Belle and she would help terminate the pregnancy.
Besides all of this, she was a legit farmer. She grew potatoes and other vegetables, and she raised hogs. She even made some special products, such as sausages. And the sausages had some special ingredients.
One of her helpers, and she had two men that helped her out. But one of them said that sometimes if she was tired, it gets tiring killing people and chopping up their bodies. Instead of burying them, she'd feed them to the pigs. And then the pigs would eat the bodies. And then she was known for the sausages she made. So, in other words, well, you get the picture.
Belle started doing what would become her signature move. She placed ads in Norwegian newspapers like Scandinavian and Posten. She informed the suitors that she had a big, nice farm and that she was looking for a husband. But she made it blatantly obvious that she wasn't looking for men without money.
What was the term? No triflers need apply. So she wanted people who had some money and were willing to come to her farm and invest and live with her.
And then she also made really specific demands before they actually went to her farm, didn't she?
You are so correct. She would say, don't tell anybody you're coming, take all the money out of your bank, sew it into like the lining of your coat. All these things that a lot of us would think, well, wasn't that a red flag if somebody says, don't tell where you're going and, don't talk about our relationship and you take all your money and sew it in your coat. But yes, it was very specific.
One man who obeyed to all the demands was Peter Fredriksson. He had money and life insurance, all the things Belle looked for in a man. She told him to sell his house and move in with her. Fredriksson was up for it, but then he got cold feet. The reason was that his friends warned him, and his housekeeper took one look at Belle and said, "Do not marry that woman." So he didn't, and that might have saved him. But the rejection didn't slow Belle down. It redirected her. She turned her gaze towards someone else, Belle Gunness, the son of the very same woman who had warned Fredriksson not to marry Belle. Belle Gunness had just lost his wife. He had 2 kids, and he did not last long in Belle's household. According to Belle, Peter had been reaching for something on a high shelf when a meat grinder fell and hit him. But her story changed, and not everyone believed her. Peter's brother, Gustav, was one of the skeptics, and he didn't think Peter's daughter, Svanhild, was safe in Belle's care, so he kidnapped her. The details are murky. Some say he kidnapped her in the night. Others say it happened as she was walking home from school. Whatever the truth is, Svanhild survived, and she lived to be an old woman. That wasn't the case for Jennie Olsen. Jennie had been a part of the household for years, and Belle had originally adopted her from a family friend.
She begged the mother to let her have Jennie for a while, but under the promise that she would return her to the father when he had a good job, but he had all these kids, and so but she refused to return Jennie. But Jennie was with her for the longest till she was about 16, and then she murdered her. Supposedly she killed Jennie because Jennie was set to get an inheritance from her mother's death that she was supposed to get at a certain age. And so Belle said that she'd gone away to school in California, but nobody ever heard from Jennie again. She's a beautiful little girl, too. I mean, not that it matters. Nobody deserves to die, whether they're beautiful or not, but she was supposedly very sweet.
And she probably knew too much as well.
They think she knew a lot. That's a very good point. She knew a lot.
And what did she know about? Well, she probably knew a thing or two about all the men that came and then just disappeared. Like, for instance, Olaf Lindbo, the farmhand who became Belle's lover and wrote letters to his father back in Norway. He informed his father that he was happy and that he might get married, but then, all of a sudden, Olaf was gone. People asked, and Belle answered, a little bit too much perhaps. First she said he had gone to St. Louis for the World's Fair. Then she said he went back to Norway. Later on, she even said that he had gone west to Homestead. But no one ever heard from Olaf again. Then came another farmhand, Henry Gurholt. He also didn't last long. Again, Belle said he had left her, but his stuff was still there. Belle even walked around in his fur jacket. The neighbors were getting suspicious, but Belle kept posting matrimonial ads. Another suitor, Ole Budsberg from Wisconsin, saw her ad in a Norwegian newspaper. He was also intrigued, and he made the trip. And of course, he disappeared shortly after. When his sons contacted the sheriff, they were told not to worry. Nothing was going on that farm. But according to Ammeson, the sheriff knew that something was going on. So the word kind of got out that something fishy was going on in there.
It seems like a lot of the neighbors knew. I would say definitely the sheriff knew. Um, and he probably was in cahoots with her. He, so many people were disappearing. So many people were coming to town and saying, I'm looking for my brother, I'm looking for my father. And Sheriff Smutzer must have had an idea was coming. Plus, he had this really fancy sports car. I can't remember the cost of it, but there was only one other car like it in town, and that belonged to a wealthy lawyer. And there was no way he was able to do that on the salary he was making.
You said that there were so many red flags there, right? But at the
Mhm.
same time, she was able to game the system and get away with it.
She
How did
was.
she do it?
Well, I think that, I mean, even nowadays, people get taken all the time. Somebody calls and says, you're going to you inherited all this money, but you've got to send me money to get the money. I mean, you hear about scams all the time. People can be very gullible. And she would talk about how, was seductive sexually, but also in terms of food and just being with somebody who spoke your language and cooked the food you like. Um, you know, I I like to think most of us wouldn't fall for that, but enough people did fall for that with her.
So what she actually did was that she really took advantage of the homesickness that a lot of
Oh,
Norwegian
yeah,
Americans felt. Is that
right. Yeah. Oh, imagine if you're living on a farm by yourself in South Dakota and miles of wheat fields or emptiness, and even the towns themselves are small. I mean, it seems like the idea of a wife who coddles you and provides for you and cooks for you and is part of your your heritage must be pretty overwhelming.
Hmm.
Not everybody fell for it, obviously, but people did. I mean, there were a lot of body parts on that farm.
Andrew Helgelien was also one of the men who fell for Belle's scheme. But unlike many of the others, he didn't obey to all of Belle's demands. Helgelien, from all in Norway, was close to his family. He had spent a considerable time in prison, and his brother, in particular, had helped him get back on his feet afterwards. So when Andrew Helgelien disappeared, his brother didn't take it lightly. Luckily, Andrew Helgelien had also left enough traces for his brother to figure out where to go.
His brother showed up to find him. And nobody knew where he was. The brother went, all through the farm, looking here, looking there. Belle said, "Oh no, he left." I can't remember. She always had an excuse why people left. The sheriff was like, "Oh no, not to worry, go on. He must have gone someplace else." And finally, the brother was just about to leave to catch a train to go back to South Dakota. And then said, "Well, what about over there? Have you dug any holes there?" or something like that. And they said, "Well, we buried some cans." So he said, "Could you go back over there?" And they dug it and they found his brother. And his brother wasn't so badly decomposed that they couldn't identify him.
Now it wasn't just rumors. Now there was an evidence, a hard evidence, the kind of evidence that even a corrupt sheriff couldn't ignore. And Belle realized she had to disappear, not just from La Porte and the farm, but from the face of the earth, or at least make it look like she did.
She had to get out of Dodge. So there was this huge fire. The children were killed, and there was the body of a woman there, too. And so everybody tried to say it was Belle, or some people said it was Belle, and other people said no. And the head was severed and the head had disappeared. And some people argued that the head exploded, but according to some medical testimony, heads don't just explode at temperatures under, let's say, 2000.
Do you personally think that she actually died in that fire, or?
No, the body didn't match. The Belle was heavy, maybe 300 pounds. The body was of a woman, very slender. I think that's why they got, the head disappeared. No, I think Belle got away. I think she set up this woman to look like her body. She murdered her children and set the fire so that people would think the family had died in the fire.
Where do you think she went?
I don't know. People spotted her, but even now people spot people. I don't think she went back to Norway.
No.
Supposedly she might have gone to California. There was a woman they thought was her, but it turned out it wasn't, though this woman had done a couple murders too. So I don't know where she went. She was spotted different places, but I don't know.
Do you think it's possible to just like do something like that for, let's say, like 20 years, 25 years, and then just like move out to California and live a perfectly normal life afterwards?
I maybe you could argue a couple things. One, she got scared enough that it was like, okay, this is it. I don't have to do this kind of stuff anymore. She had a lot of money. She didn't have it all, probably. So maybe you get tired of it too. You know what I mean? I mean, it's got to be hard just killing people and processing their bodies. Maybe she did kill some more people and we just don't know about it.
One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that Ammeson isn't just a writer. She is also a psychologist. And the question that she might be able to answer as a psychologist is, of course, what made Belle tick. What made her kill? She was allegedly wronged by a guy when she
Right.
was young. Do you think
Well,
she was seeking revenge and money, or only?
no, I mean, I don't. We've all had people break up with us. I mean, I've never been beaten or anything like that, and most of us haven't. But I don't think it sets us on a course to become a mass murderer. I mean, that takes a different kind of personality. I think she was very poor. She liked having money. She liked having fine things. I think money provided a sense of security that her life growing up didn't. If anything, I think the motivator for her was money, and she would do anything to get it. I think she liked outwitting people too. And you know what? She probably made a lot more money than a lot of even men who were in business. And maybe that was a little bit, there was a revenge factor. Maybe it was like, look at me, I'm living well.
While researching this story, I've been thinking quite a bit about what this story really is about. Is it a story about America, or is it a story about Norway? Or, to put it in another way, is it a story about freewheeling American capitalism and how everything can be monetized, even abortions and dead husbands? Or is it a story about the immigrant experience? How gullible and desperate some Norwegians were, just trying to get a foothold in a new country? Or is it just a story? I honestly don't know the answer to that. For all I know, the predator and the victims could just as well have been Lithuanian or Korean, and it might just as well have happened somewhere else entirely. But Belle was a Norwegian, and it did happen in America, and I believe she did change America. First of all, by killing a lot of people and tearing those victims away from their families. But I also think she killed the moment of innocence. Norwegians had, from the beginning, been seen as desirable immigrants. Land agents were sent to Norway to recruit them. The ruling class in America wanted Lutheran Norwegians to build the railroads, head west, and help carry out the so-called Manifest Destiny. But there were actually reports that Norwegians got a bad rap after this heavily publicized story about Belle Gunness reached national media. I don't know whether that's accurate, and if it's accurate, how long it lingered. But at the very least, the old saying that every village has a villain must have rung a little truer. Because now, the Norwegian Americans had their villain, their Femme Fatale, Belle Gunness. My name is Fredrik Kalstveit, and this episode was made in conjunction with Vesterheim Museum and with the support of Norway House Foundation out of San Francisco. The music you hear in the background was made by Jan Skoglund.